God doesn't, create arbitrarily, and He's not judged by it. Rather, it's grounded in God's very person, God, who God is. And there's all sorts of things we can begin to do some theological work, but we need to do that after we, finish and demonstrate the truth of the conclusion. And to do that, we need to move on to our second premise. So let me check the time right here. We are about 30 minutes in. So this is very similar to the moral argument video. The Kalam argument video. So what we're going to do is look at the second premise of the moral argument, which says that objective moral values and duties do in fact exist. Now, this is the premise that I find most of the time people object to, although they tend to think they're objecting to the first premise when in reality they're objecting to the second premise. And so sometimes it's helpful to lay out the syllogism and ask people, which premise are you really objecting to? Now, what I'm going to do is demonstrate why we are rationally justified in believing the second premise. And again, it's not really an argument. Rather, what we're going to do is, again, this is sort of just a basic intuition. And what we need to do is think about, why we are rationally justified for just believing in certain in basic beliefs. Okay? And then we'll look at a couple objections to that. And then we'll look at an additional reason for why we should believe the second premise. That sometimes hits people a little harder, but it's kind of it's inescapable, and so it's important to understand. So, the basic statement in philosophy, in modern epistemology, is that our sense experiences are prima facie justified. And so your sense experiences are things like, I see the water bottle in my hand right now. I hear the fan spinning over my head. I smell the leftover food in the trash can next to me. Okay? All of those are basic sense experiences. And the point to understand here is we also have a moral sense. You and I have a sense that, it's wrong to, if you saw someone, like in Star Wars and Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan says really awkward, corny line where he says he's seen a video hologram, or I've seen a hologram recording of Anakin killing younglings. And it's like, can't you just say children? Why can't you say younglings? Killing younglings. But people recognize, yeah, that was wrong. You know what I mean? It's disturbingly evil, and we have this sense of that. Now, people object to that sense for a lot of reasons, and there's two main objections to that sense. We'll get to those objections, but first, we want to understand. Let's think about our basic sense experiences, and so to do this, we really need to go back to the sheep example. I know we had to do it in the last video, and we're doing it in this video, but it's vital to think this through because it'll help us unpack the problems with the objections. So, you're walking down the road. Classic example from epistemology. You're walking down the road. You see a field. Out in the field, you see a sheep grazing in the pasture. You're walking by a farm, and there is a sheep grazing. In the hometown of my dad's side of the family, as I was driving back not too long ago, it's a country town, and behind the Walmart, there is a field, and I saw sheep grazing in that field. Fenced in field, okay? So you look out and you see a sheep grazing in the field. On the basis of that, you form the basic belief that there is a sheep out there in the field. It is a basic belief. It is not based on a chain of reasoning. You do not read evidence from different journals and calculate the probability estimates. You just looked out there and saw the sheep. Okay? Alright, so the question is, are you justified for believing in the sheep? Well, what does justified mean? Well, justified has to do with something that in philosophy is called the classical definition of knowledge. So, in philosophy, when we say that you know something, that means that you believe it, it's true, and you have some good reason for why you believe it, or justification is the term. So, like, first of all, it's sort of obvious that for you to know something, you have to believe it. Second of all, it's sort of obvious that it needs to be true. If it's not true, then you didn't know it. Because we can believe all sorts of things that turn out not to be true, and then we would say, well, I guess we didn't know. But in addition, there's a justification requirement, and this is called the classical definition of knowledge. There's a justification requirement because, like, so for example, I know a young man who thinks that the University of Georgia will win every single game they ever play in, and when they do win, he says, I knew it. Well, you didn't really know it, you just say that every time. You didn't have any good justification for why you say that, or, a big example is the guy who believed the conspiracy theories. He doesn't know that they're true, he just believes them, or he says he does, maybe he doesn't even believe them, but assuming that he does, it doesn't count as knowledge, because he admitted to me that he didn't have any reason why. He didn't admit it, he just explained his theory in greater detail, but it wasn't obvious to me why that, justified it, or you could be a lucky guesser, and you could just, go through the multiple choice test and just guess on every question, total shot in the dark guess, and get 100. It's possible, but did you really know anything? No. You know what I mean? So that's how that works. So our basic sense experiences are what's called prima facie justified. And what that means is, prima facie means that you are rational to believe them unless you have a good defeater for them. So let's go back to the example of the farmer and the sheep, and this will help us to examine the objections that we're about to examine in just a minute. You're walking by the field, you see a sheep, you form the belief that there's a sheep. The farmer who owns the field comes up to you, and you know him to be an honest farmer who knows his fields well. And he tells you that at this distance, the distance that it is to the sheep, let's say the sheep's 100 feet away, and then he comes up to you and says, I have a sheepdog that at 100 feet away looks exactly like a sheep. It's indistinguishable from a sheep. What you now have is what's called an undercutting defeater for your belief in the sheep. It's not a rebutting defeater. A rebutting defeater would be if the farmer said, that's not a sheep out there, that's a sheepdog. An undercutting defeater just removes your justification. So now you're no longer justified in believing in the sheep because the farmer represents a good defeater. So the issue is that even if the farmer didn't come up to you, it's logically possible that he could come up to you. He could always come up to you. There are some things that are logically impossible. Like, the farmer can't come up to you and be a farmer and not a farmer. That's logically impossible. He can't be a farmer and not a farmer in the same sense at the same time. There are certain things that are logically impossible. It's impossible for 1 plus 1 to equal anything but 2. It's impossible for the number 3 to equal the number 7. It's impossible for the number 7 to weigh more than Donald Trump. There are certain things that are just logically they cannot be. So like I don't know if that's a logical impossibility. That's probably a metaphysical impossibility. So that's a teaser for the last video. We don't need to go into that for this video. But it's logically possible that the farmer could come up to you and tell you that, hey, I have at 100 feet I have a sheepdog that you can't tell the difference between that sheepdog and a sheep. That's a logically possible thing. Let's say that the farmer doesn't come up to you and tell you that. Rather, you're like me, you drive behind that Walmart. No one tells me anything about any sheepdogs. I just look out there, I see the sheep, and I believe there's sheep out there. Okay. In that situation where the farmer doesn't come up to you, it's always logically possible that he could have come up to you. So then, Do logically possible defeaters represent good defeaters, and remove your justification for your sense that you see the sheep out there? Well, the thing is, all of our senses, like sight, hearing, smell, all that stuff, there's a lot. Anytime you base a belief on those sense experiences, you are taking into risk that there's always something like the farmer in every situation. Some kind of something that could make it so that you are unjustified and don't really know what you're believing. You're wrong in your beliefs. Like, at the very least, it's possible that you are a brain in a vat, and some sort of very advanced scientist has figured out, how to hook human brains into wires to feed you a completely false world, and you're living in a virtual computer simulation. That is possible. It's logically possible. It's not known to be possible, but hey, maybe the scientist doesn't want you to know. So he made it appear that you were in 2022, but he actually exists in the far future where that's possible. And you do too, and you just don't know it. Okay? So, here's the question. And the classic question from epistemology: are you rationally justified in believing in the sheep, even though it's logically possible that the farmer could come up to you? The conclusion of modern epistemology and modern philosophy is yes. You are logically justified. You are rationally justified. And the reason why is, one way to think of it is, for every logically possible defeater, we can think up a logically possible defeater. And we can think up a defeater. So the classic example is that the farmer's wife comes up to you and says, "Oh, don't listen to Farmer Bob. He's heavily medicated right now because he got sick. He's kind of off his rocker right now." Or, "Don't listen to Farmer Bob. He started drinking, or something. Or, he got hit in the head today while working on the tractor." It's possible that could happen. And so, logically possible defeaters, as they say, come cheap. You can always make up another one. And in essence, what they do is they cancel each other out. And they cannot be given more weight than the fact that you just see the sheep there. Has to carry more weight than this infinitude of logically possible defeaters that cancel each other out. And so, in the event that the farmer doesn't come up to you, you should believe in the sheep. If the farmer did come up to you, that would represent a good defeater for your belief. Okay? Now that we've got that, we can move forward. Okay? So, the thing is, while we have these five senses, taste, touch, hearing, smell, feel, and sight. I forgot sight. There is always in addition, there's other basic intuitions that we have, like mathematical truths. How do you know that 1 + 1 = 2? Well, it appears that we, on some sort of mental level, mentally observe. It's like sight, but it's not normal sight. The concept. And it also seems that with morality, we, on some sort of mental level, observe morality on some sort of level. We don't know what this mental level might be. Mental, the world of the mind in philosophy just means, it's just a catch-all term for anything in your internal experience. We could be talking about souls, spirits, whatever. It doesn't go into detail about any of that. It just says the mental world. So, we seem to experience that, a sense of right and wrong. And like our other senses, it has limits. It's not unlimited. So, I can't see everything in the world, If I was Superman, and my lawnmower wouldn't start, I could, x-ray it and see, that the carburetor's clogged. But since I'm not Superman, I have to take the carburetor off and clean it, on the possibility that it's clogged, So, I mean, there's things I can't see. And morality is similar in that way, because there's some situations where it's not clear what the right thing to do is, and there's other ones where it seems much more clear. So like, it's clear to me that the water bottle's on the table in front of me, but what's going on inside my carburetor when my lawnmower is running poorly is not so clear. It's clear to me when I see someone, if someone was in this room right now breaking a baby's arm, it's clear to me that that's bad. But just for pure pleasure or something, that's clearly bad. But there are other situations where, like, it's not so clear what the right thing to do is. Classic example is an ambulance nurse, and 35-year-old man had a heart attack. They revived him. He wakes up in the ambulance, asks the nurse, "Did I have a heart attack?" Well, do you tell the guy that he had a heart attack? Well, if you do, he'll probably have another heart attack, and you don't want to kill him. You're here trying to save him. But at the same time, if you think you can just operate on people without their, consent, then you basically become some sort of mad scientist just doing experiments on people because you decided it's for the best. You might as well, that's terrifying too. I mean, that's tantamount slavery. And so that's a tough, what the right thing to do in that situation seems to not be so obvious. Okay? So, anyway, we do have this sense experience. And so the moral sense, like our sense of sight, is what's called prima facie justified. And prima facie just means that in the absence of a good defeater, you are rationally justified for believing it. It doesn't mean that it's unfalsifiable, that it's impossible for there to be good defeaters, but that you have to give more weight to what you see, okay? And in morality, the same thing goes. So that's why objective moral values and duties exist, and you really are rational for believing in them, that you have this basic moral sense, okay? So there are two objections that we want to consider, and the first one we'll take a look at is basically, I mean, there's different ways of putting it. Cultural relativism, morality as a social construct, the different terminology for it, subjective morality, but like the basic idea is that people made it up and then taught it to their kids, and it's just become something that's in our culture that everyone believes in and everyone teaches to everybody, and everybody just kind of assumes it's true. And so we've just sort of been force-fed this, and we see the world in this way. But in another culture, they don't see the world that way, and they have a different sort of moral culture. And so they're saying, what they're doing is, they're not, a lot of times people don't lay it out. They just say, but other people don't agree with you. And that's kind of confusing. It's like, what do I care if other people don't agree with me? They're wrong. Like if I was to tell you that I got gas for $3.99 today, a gallon, and somebody said, well, other people don't agree with you that I got it for $3.99. Well, they're wrong. I got the receipt. I paid for it. I don't care. They're kooks. But so what I'm trying to do here is to fill in the missing details of people's objection. And I think what they're really saying is this, without really saying it, but what they mean to say without saying it well, is that the fact that other cultures have different moral systems is like the farmer in the example. That I look out in the field, I see the sheep, and I'm rationally justified for believing in the sheep. It's prima facie justified belief, and so therefore it counts as knowledge. That I see a sheep, therefore there's a sheep. But if the farmer comes up to me, now I've got a good defeater, and what they're doing is they're saying these other cultures that have different moral systems are like the farmer. So it's like this, like here I am, I'm a Christian, I look out there and see a sheep, but a Hindu comes up and says, well, I see an elephant. And a Muslim comes up and says, I see a cow or a pig, and an atheist comes up and says, I see, I don't know what the atheist would see. Nothing, the atheist, I don't know. And different cultures have different beliefs. Someone from Japan might see a capybara. So that's really, I think that's really what people are saying, is that you have a good defeater, and so your belief is not prima facie justified. Okay, so that's all well and good, that's all lovely, but the problem with that objection is it doesn't take into account moral progress. If moral progress is part of your view of morality, then it's perfectly possible for there to be different, cultural relativism, and yet it doesn't represent an undercutting defeater. In other words, if the defeater says something that is perfectly consistent with your original view, then it doesn't really refute your view. So it's as though I look out there and I see a sheep, and the farmer comes out there and says, I've got a 50-pound sheep out in that field. Well, he didn't really say what I was believing, but at the same time, it doesn't really refute what I believe at all. It's perfectly consistent with what I already believed, and so it doesn't represent a good defeater. It doesn't represent a defeater at all. So the first point we need to make is that cultural relativism is, a lot of times in these arguments, it's blown out of proportion. First of all, there is no record of any society ever, today or past, existing on this planet that saw cowardice in battle as a good thing. Even pacifists don't value cowardice. So, that's one thing that's been consistent. So you don't have a defeater for that. And then that already proves the second premise, because since our sense experiences are prima facie justified and we have a moral sense, then we only need one moral value or duty to justify the second premise of the moral argument. I don't need a whole complex moral system for this argument to work. I just need one moral law. And then that's all it takes for me to prove objective moral values and duties exist. I just need one. Okay? But we could go further than that, because a lot of cultural relativism is blown out of proportion. So there's a lot of things that look like moral differences, and they look like prescriptive differences, when in reality they're descriptive differences. So an example would be, the example I get from a philosophy textbook by J.P. Moreland and William Lane Craig. It goes like this. There may be some native tribe somewhere where they kill old people that can't hunt and fish and take care of themselves. And in our society, we put people up in nursing homes and we treasure our elderly. And it would seem like this is a clear moral difference. You murder the elderly or you preserve the elderly. Seems like a clear moral difference. But let's say that their beliefs about the afterlife are different from ours, and we believe as Christians that in the afterlife you get a resurrected body, but they believe that whatever state your body's in when you die will be the state that it is in the afterlife. In fact, the ancient Egyptians appear to believe just that, something similar to that. And so they think they're doing something to help the elderly by going ahead and killing them so that they don't have this tired, worn-out body in the afterlife forever. So both, the moral view in both is love the elderly, but they believe there's a factual difference. It's no different from, normally it would be wrong to cut people with a knife, but if they need surgery for some sort of medical treatment, then it actually becomes the right thing to do. And it's not that you don't care about people when surgeons perform surgery. It's just that they have a different factual knowledge about what that person needs. Okay, what the patient needs. So once we go through a lot of that, it turns out there's not nearly as much cultural relativism as we thought. But there does appear to still be some cultural relativism. And so now we need to address that. We don't have to, but I guess it's still healthy to do so. Again, the thing is, when people make this objection, they're failing to understand a concept of moral progress. They're not allowing for that. So, I can provide what in philosophy is very common. I can provide counter examples. So, I've got 2 counter examples that we can look at. Alright, so first we'll take a look at the moral situation. Today, in 2022, generally people think that the world is round. And generally people think that slavery is an abomination and evil. Okay? But in the past, in 2000 BC, generally people thought the world was flat and no one had a problem with slavery. Both of those things, a lot of people are like don't want to accept that. They're like, no one had a problem with slavery. I remember telling one guy, and he's like, he refused. He was offended that that anyone would think that because slavery's wrong, and he was so offended that anybody would have a problem. That there would be a world where nobody had a problem with it. But that is the ancient world of 2000 BC, and we'll take a look at like that as we go. But for now, let's just go ahead and say that is the ancient world. Just like people in the ancient world thought it was flat. Okay? Well, a Greek philosopher by the name of Thales, and I don't know when Thales lived, and I want to get this. Thales. Let's see. Thales of Miletus was a Greek mathematician, astronomer, and a pre-Socratic philosopher, so he came before Socrates and Plato. Alright, and roughly 500 BC. Okay, around that time. Alright. So anyway, I'm reading this article and I don't need to be doing that. To my knowledge, it's not saying that he was the guy who calculated the Earth, who figured out the Earth was round. Okay. Oh yeah, he did figure out that it was round. Alright. Anyway, we'll move on. He was the guy who figured out the Earth was round around 500 BC. So, let's think about that. Everybody thought it was flat. And everybody thought the world floated on water because when you dig down, you find water. And everybody thought that there was a dome called the sky over us that held back water because sometimes water falls down. So they thought that the world was like living it was like a bubble. Okay? In a big ocean. It's just water everywhere and we live in a bubble inside it. As soon as Thales began to work on this, he very quickly devised a way measuring the shadow of the sun in different places, I think in Egypt, and he devised a way to measure the overall circumference of the Earth, the distance around the globe, and he was really close. He was quite accurate. And so, the interesting question is, why did it take so long? Empires rose and fell. People migrated. Technology drastically changed. Technological revolutions occurred. Monumental things were constructed. And everybody thought the Earth was flat until Thales came along. Why? Well, he was what's the difference between Thales and everyone who came before him? Okay, because he didn't have any measuring tools that weren't available. Like, it was kind of obvious once he asked the question. The difference with him was that he asked the question and took it seriously. Maybe they'd asked it before, but no one had really asked it. But he considered it for the first time. Why had no one considered it for so long? Well, doesn't the earth look obviously flat? It's clear that it does look obviously flat. I mean, don't you look out? I look out. Don't we see a flat earth? And so Thales was the first to ask the question, what if it's round? But then he also asked the question, he said, like, well, it's obviously flat, so what if it's just a really big ball, really big sphere, and so it appears flat? All right? So the difference with Thales was not any sort, he didn't get, God didn't take him up to heaven or on a flying horse up in the sky so he could look down there and say, oh, look, it's round. No. The difference with him, and the reason he figured this out, and then was able to measure the circumference of the earth and come up with a scientific proof, was because he asked the question. Okay? Let's look at a different example. In the days of Thales, in the later Roman era, in Israel, in ancient Assyria, the number systems were all based on their alphabet. They were basically they're different versions of Roman numerals because they had different alphabets. If you know how Roman numerals works, you understand the number systems of most of the ancient world. The Babylonians had a cuneiform system, which was better, but it was nothing compared to what came out of India in the Middle Ages, and what's called the Hindu-Arabic numerals, which Arabic is just because it came to us in Europe through the Arabic world, but they're really Hindu numerals. And the number system that we take for granted today was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is so much better than what they had before. Can you imagine doing long division with Roman numerals? I can't imagine it. It seems insane. And they didn't do it. They found all kinds of cool ways to avoid it. So, for example, the foot is divided in 12 inches. Why 12? Why not some other number? Why not 10? Why not 4? Well, 12 can be divided in half very easily. It can be divided into thirds very easily. And it can be divided into 4 equal parts or quarters very easily. It can even be divided into sixths, and it can be divided obviously into twelfths. So that was one of those things. Like the Babylonian number system was based on sixes. So you had digits of 1s and 5s. And then you could have, the first column was 6. So how many six, what was the one, and it had a 1s column, if I remember right. Yeah. And then they had a 6 column, and then they had a 60 column, and then a 600 column. Like, in our system we have today, we have a 1s column, a 10s column, and a 100s column, and a 1,000 column, and it goes up from there. And the system that we have, the Hindu numerals that we have, are so much better that, like, in the Middle Ages, everyone sent their kid to their young boys to something called arithmetic schools, so that they could learn to crunch numbers and do math, and then they could have a career just crunching numbers for people. It was a real thing. Like, you could calculate interest rates, you could calculate profits and losses, and all sorts of things that just they would keep the books for people's businesses and stuff, and it was just a huge breakthrough. On the same question occurs, like, why did no one ever think of that before? Because no one had had the idea. And once somebody had the idea, it kind of became obviously the best way to do things. but just no one had had the idea before. Not until the Middle Ages did the idea finally emerge. And if you look at just inventions in general, most inventions, like technological inventions, once somebody has the idea, it becomes this sort of duh thing that, like, it goes from being impossible to obviously good almost instantaneously. And that's the weird thing about inventions. Like, they start out as something that, a problem that some people don't even think of as a problem, and if anybody does, they think it's impossible. And once somebody figures out a way to solve the problem, then everybody wonders why on earth you would do it any other way ever. You know? Like an example would be the invention of eyeglasses in the Middle Ages, and like a lens that corrects, you know, so that people can continue to see as they get older. It seems like such a simple idea, but no one had ever thought of it before. The Greeks in the ancient times invented water wheels. Why had no one thought of water wheels before? You know? But once they did, it was like, oh, they could power stuff with water wheels. They invented systems of gears that they could use for their water wheels, but also for cranes, so they could create winches and lift heavy objects. It seems so obvious to make systems of gears now, but like before somebody thought of it, nobody thought of it for thousands of years. And that's one of the problems of explaining how the pyramids were built, because they lifted those rocks without systems of gears and winches and cranes. You know, you can make a hand-driven crane if you have the right gear ratios, and you can lift a big old rock by hand. And you can lift it as high as you want if you have the right crane, you know, because a gear is basically like a spinning lever. And, you know, as Archimedes, I think it was Archimedes put it, he said, if you give me the right lever in the right spot, I can lift the earth. You know, a lot of things are like that. Once you have the insight, it sort of becomes obvious. And so moral progress works just like that. Why did it take so long for slavery to be abolished? Why in the ancient world did no one have a problem with slavery? Well, the issue is that the New Testament and the gospel of Jesus Christ introduced a new concept called human equality. And the concept is introduced through this whole story, really, of like God's one and only Son, so someone who is the highest level royalty imaginable, the only begotten Son of the Most High God, comes down here and loves us enough to die to bear our punishment in our place so that we can be adopted into God's family. So that introduces an idea of the value of all people. The lowest of the low is having all of their debts paid for by the highest of the high at great cost. And now we're all being offered entrance into the highest royal family through this process. And some people reject it, but it's offered to everyone. So like, what it does is that it introduces this idea of human equality. Why did that idea not occur to people before? Well, just like with the flat earth and the round earth, it's not obvious. It's not obvious that people are equal. Human equality is not obvious. Like, it's a classic proverb that I grew up hearing all the time, is that there's only one of anybody, and that everybody is different, and no two people are the same. And we all know that to be true. Everybody's different. How could you believe that everybody's equal? Equal? Nobody's equal. Everybody's different in one way or another. And this is what people believe in the ancient world. And they believe some people were better and some people were worse. And that seems obviously true, right? Some people are smarter. Some people are not as smart. Some people are better looking. Some people are worse looking. Some people are stronger, faster, slower. You know, some people are fat. Some people are skinny. Some people are tall. Some people are short. Some people have deformities. Some people have blonde hair. Some people have brown hair. Some people have blue eyes. Some people have green eyes. Some people have red hair. Some people smell bad. Some people, you know, are missing teeth. And some people have all their teeth. Okay, some people can hear well. Some people are talented at music. Some people are not so good at music. Some people are talented at math. Some people are not so talented at math. You know, everybody's different. How could you possibly believe in human equality? It's not obvious at all. But the New Testament and the gospel of Jesus Christ introduced this idea. And it's one of those things, and it's like the round earth. It's like, well, obviously the earth's flat, but like, what if it is in fact round on some larger level? Like really big. It could be round, right? And once you consider that question seriously, well, what the message of Christianity did is it forced people to consider the question of human equality seriously. And it's like, obviously we're not the same. But on some deeper level, we must be, and that may be the more important level. And then, once you introduce that question into the mix, you have moral progress occurring for some people who take the question seriously. Now, how does moral progress happen? Well, it's a lot like mathematical progress or this scientific progress, like with Thales. First thing that has to happen is somebody has to ask the question, or the question has to be raised, or the concept has to be put in front of us for consideration. Okay? Then you begin to contemplate it, and with morality, it's more like mathematics than science in the sense that you just sort of intuitively see it. You know, just like you kind of see a mathematical proof. There are many mathematical proofs that there's some point where somebody figured out that proof. You know, and like there's mathematical concepts like, how did Isaac Newton figure out the basic theorems for calculus? Because they became really important for physics and for math in general. But for a long time, nobody had those. For centuries, nobody had figured that out. And it's one of those things that like a lot of people still don't understand because they don't take the time to contemplate it. But if you contemplate it, you begin to see that it's the truth. It's the same way with slavery. Certain people took the idea seriously, and on some sort of mental level, they saw it, that there is this deeper human equality. And the point for us, for the sake of this video and the sake of this argument, is that our sense experiences are prima facie justified. And if the farmer comes up to you and tells you that he has a sheep over there that weighs 50 pounds, or he tells you that most of his sheep weigh under 30 pounds, it in no way undercuts. Okay, so yeah, other cultures believe other things, but that's because moral progress is a real thing. You know, so what's the problem here? Now, there's an additional issue of like, so like we'll get into it in a minute, but like, for example, the Supreme Court in America has just ruled that abortion is no longer going to be a right guaranteed by the Constitution, and rather the states will have to decide what they want to do with that. And a lot of people in this country really believe that the right to an abortion was an example of moral progress. It's something that we didn't always see as a basic human right for women and as a woman's right. And then they came to believe that like society came to see that that is a basic woman's right. That's an example of moral progress. There are situations where like abortion, the issue is like, you know, what is the weightier moral duty, the woman's right to choose or the life of the baby? And it's not so obvious which is the correct one. And so my point is, moral progress can happen because a lot of moral knowledge is not obvious, but once you contemplate it, it becomes more increasingly obvious, and you can see it, and your moral sense can detect it once you raise the question. And so subjective social construct issues do not function as a good defeater, you know, especially in a Christian view, where in a Christian view, the Christianity teaches that the effects of the fall of mankind has corrupted people's sense of right and wrong. And that there needs to be corrections made. And it takes work and effort to get back to where it should be. And so, if someone disagrees with you, like I said in the example, if you know the farmer to be a good and honest man who knows his fields well, and he tells you about the sheep that looks like a sheepdog, then that's a good defeater. But if you know the farmer to be a man who doesn't see things right, or a blind man, or a kook, then it doesn't represent a good defeater. And so other cultures don't necessarily represent good defeaters, because in your Christian worldview, other cultures are corrupted. How do I know they're not? That is part of my Christian worldview. But more importantly, it fits in with the idea of moral progress, because the way moral progress is made, it's not like all of the moral values and duties are super obvious. Rather, they have to be contemplated. And then it takes time for cultures to change, because not everybody wants to accept the change. Just like, with the abortion issue, today, the slavery issue was contested, and then once the anti-slavery side won in America and England, they went around the world forcing everyone to change their ways. Pretty much everyone, right? So, I guess that deals with that. I will say that I have another video that deals with this in another way. So it addresses this objection in another way, because there's a serious logical problem with how subjective morality could originate in the first place, because we tend to not see how fundamental it is. But before that, we won't go into that for today. What we're going to do is look at a different objection, and the different objection is just that we have evolved an instinct to have this moral sense, and it's just something that we've evolved to